My guest on this week's episode of Suds Search is Brett Tabke, founder and CEO of Pubcon, one of the most important conference series in search marketing. Brett has been involved in the computer and technology industry for over 30 years. He started a software company for Commodore computers back in 1984. Throughout his career, Brett has displayed an amazing ability to build communities and educational opportunities around topics related to the internet. Brett founded the Webmaster World forum in the late 90s. Webmaster World was a place where SEOs went to learn about ranking websites and search engines before it was even called SEO and before Google was the dominant search engine. The popularity of Webmaster World led directly to Brett starting Pubcon. Pubcon, which started in a literal pub in London back in 2000, has grown massively. For the past 20 years, the very best presenters in the industry have appeared at conferences in Florida, Las Vegas, and Austin. Brett was awarded the 2016 Lifetime Achievement Award at the U.S. Search Awards for all his contributions to the industry. This has been an interesting year for conferences, to put it mildly. Pubcon, like everyone else, had to take their conferences virtual and adapt to life during the pandemic. As vaccines are rolling out, a return to in-person conferences appears imminent. I start our conversation asking Brett about the recent past, present, and future of Pubcon. Join me for a conversation with Brett Tabke, one of the really good guys in our industry. I'll ask him what makes a conference presentation great, and why some presenters crash and burn. We'll reflect on 20 years of hosting Pubcon, and make sure to stick around to hear Brett's all-time favorite Pubcon memory.
Brett Tabke, welcome to Suds Search. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on, Mark. I appreciate the time.
It's great to have you on. It's such an interesting moment for conferences. We've got vaccinations rolling out all over the country. Things are starting to open up, at least here in Illinois. Do you have any sense of when Pubcon will be back with live in-person events?
You know, we've got kind of a duality thing going on. We've got half of the people are so eager to get back together. They just can't wait to see each other. And hardly a day goes by when I don't get an email of people, when are you going to have a conference? When are you going to have a conference? You know, I'm trying to save time. And, they're just trying to ping me for a date to pick a date. And we're going to go ahead and pick dates here pretty soon, first week of August for Florida. It looks like we're going to be back there. As we're recording this, we're waiting on contracts and final ink on everything, but it's all been agreed. So we're going to do the first week of August in Florida. This is a makeup conference from our conference that was postponed last spring because of COVID. So we are looking forward to that.
Awesome.
So.
Oh, that's great news. Yeah, I was supposed to be at that one, so I think I will see you in person in August. It sounds awesome. So. Well, it reflected on me. This is kind of an open-ended question, but there might not be anybody who's seen as many live conference presentations as you. You've had this for 20 years. Pubcon's been doing this kind of work. I wonder if there's any sort of common thread or anything that makes a great conference presentation that you've seen over the course of your career.
Well, number one, people want actionable information. And let me just preface that by saying everybody's in the audience for a different reason. You got folks who are new, you got folks who are experienced, you got folks right in the middle like, hey, what's this guy know or woman know? I'm going to stop in this session. So it really depends on the audience to start with. You can have a very appropriate speaker give a knockout presentation for intro SEOs, and it turns out it's all advanced people in the audience, and they're not going to give it a great review. So that's the starter, knowing your audience, knowing who's in the audience. Are you going to Pubcon, or are you going to the local marketing group? Are you going to the Rotary Club? I've been on both sides of that. I've been at advanced SEOs and given great presentations. And then I've been totally ill prepared. One time in Dallas, I gave a presentation to an alumni association that I thought was the Computer Alumni Association. It turned out to be the Athletic Alumni Association. And I'm up there giving tips and tricks on Twitter and Facebook, and they're like, oh, wow, what's this guy talking about? So that's number one. Knowing your audience is the biggest thing coming in the room. After that, we're not talking rocket science here. Share what you know, case studies. People love actionable stuff from your own experiences that isn't promotional. People really sniff out promotion anymore. They smell it a mile away when you start talking about, well, we did it this way and we can do it for you this way too. They know the difference. So that's number one. Knowing your audience is the biggest battle. So.
Well, interesting. And maybe you just answered this question, but I'm curious. You've probably watched a few people crash and burn. So you've probably watched some people get up on the conference stage and it did not go according to plan. What are the common mistakes where people fail to deliver a great conference presentation?
Inappropriate presentations for the audience. We've had people get up and, like I said, give intro level content for advanced level people and vice versa. So that's the biggest thing. The second biggest thing is they did their deck the night before. They didn't practice it. They have no idea, and they start rambling on about, and that reminds me about this time in 1985 I did this, and they ramble on about something tangent, and it's not back to the core message of their presentation. That's the second big thing, besides knowing your audience, is to practice, 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 practice. That's why people like Greg are so good at presentations, is he gets so much practice in real life and at home. I know how long he spends on his decks prepping everyone, so he knows exactly what he wants to say at every slide and how he needs to say it to reach people. So that's number two.
Yeah.
Practice, practice, practice.
Love it. Yeah, and before I worked with Greg, he's one of my favorite conference presenters in the world. I wonder, are you own the conference, but I imagine you're also a fan. You also like to listen to certain speakers and presenters. Do you have 3, 4, 5 people who you can't wait to hear them present every year?
Yeah, and the fun part is I get to make up all the sessions. So when I'm making up sessions, I'm going, hey, Bob, you get this special spot. I'm going to come listen to you. And I make sure I don't book anybody against Bob so that I can go see him speak, or her speak. So,
Right.
Yeah, I'm definitely a fan. We have some people that are just amazing. Probably one of the biggest revelations I ever had was, it was about 2008, 2009. We had a panel of advanced PPCers. We had Frederick Valise from Google. We had somebody from Microsoft. Sure. We had Christine Churchill. And we had somebody else, probably from Yahoo, on this panel. Just, senior level in their departments at these major search engines and agencies. And there were like 20 people in the room. And Christine is texting me, Brett, where's everybody at? I go, I don't know, Christine. I don't know what the problem is. And the session's about to start. And I go next door. And here is Rand Fishkin, just fresh out of high school, Neil Patel, and a couple other young people, and the room was absolutely packed. I mean, they were hanging out the door to hang on to what these two young kids had to say about social media, and it was just a mind-blowing awakening to me that I really need to tune in to what's going on the leading edge and who's voicing that leading edge appropriately. So yeah, it's. Every conference is an education. Every conference, I get a fresh education in who's who and what's what on topics. So,
well, that's awesome. Yeah, I love your passion for this. So, you've been challenged. All the conferences have been challenged so much in the last year, and Pubcon, like virtually every other conference, has gone virtual. I prefer in-person events. I like it more for a variety of reasons, but I've been surprised. I've run into a not small number of people who go, I like the virtual stuff. I'm kind of an introvert. Mm-hmm. I like just the education. I don't need to go to steak dinners or anything like that. I like the virtual stuff. Do you have, I guess, what's the plan for virtual conferences in the future when you can go back to in-person?
Well, they definitely made some inroads. Online education forums and venues and vehicles have been growing for years and years and years. That there was that physics professor at Stanford who decided to put his entire course online 3 years ago, and they had 15,000 people sign up for that course. Free. It was free. He put it online. He just streamed his entire course, and it freaked out Stanford. They had no idea there was that kind of demand for online education. And that type of thing has been growing and growing and growing throughout the education system. Now, when it comes to conferences, I'm part of every meetings association and every meeting planners association, the international one, the local one, the Vegas one, the New York one, and we have just been bombarded with information in the last year. And by and large, The people who were traditional conferences like us and South by Southwest and a bunch of the bigger ones in Vegas all agreed virtual simply wasn't a substitute. It's just not going to substitute for what people wanted to do. But we also agree that there's a certain segment, A, they can't travel, B, they want the educational aspects, they want that little bit of networking. They want to sit in a room and maybe, like you say, set from home and learn from somebody. We've said for years there's people who can't go to Vegas to a conference. They can't go to a New York conference, but they'll drive across town to see a conference. And that's kind of why we started our Austin conference, was just to give people an opportunity in Austin to go over, come to a conference without spending a whole day out of the office on travel, and another day coming back, and then 3 days out of the office at a conference. So there are those people who love that aspect of, hey, I'm at home. I'll tune in when I want to tune in. Right. But the reality is, there was a major conference, I'm not going to call them out, a major marketing conference that had 4,000 people signed up for it, registered online, paid a couple $100 a piece, and they had less than 900 people actually watch any of it. 4,000 people had 900 show. And every conference I've talked to virtually has said similar things, that the sign-up rates are huge, nobody shows up, nobody sets through it, nobody sticks through it. We had a conference we had 900 people signed up for, and by the last session we had less than 100 there. And that wasn't cheap. It wasn't cheap. So there's a big variety coming at us of what's going to happen going forward. Personally, I think virtual conferences are going to take a hit. We're going to see a lot of the virtual platforms that have launched. They're going to go by the wayside. But there's going to be a few. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a few, like maybe Riverside.fm sticks it out. Maybe this Hoppin sticks it out. There's kind of a room, I think, for a hybrid model where we broadcast the actual conference and let people tune into that, so they get their educational part, they get their other part. So it's going to morph. It's going to change. But there's going to be no massive, upheaval of, well, we're all going virtual now. That's not going to happen. There's still the value of the networking, the in-person, the glad handing, so.
I agree. I mean, I like all of it. And some of the performance is lost too, I think, in the virtual. Like when they're on a stage and they can, you see Greg pacing back and forth, or Will Reynolds pacing back and forth. It's a performance. It's really more engaging.
Exactly.
Well, I wanted to make sure I touched on this too. Pubcon had two, I don't know if I'm using the right terminology here, but I would call them two niche conferences, and maybe more, two that were on my radar. One was about local. One was about e-commerce. What are the plans for these sort of nichified conferences moving forward? Will we continue to see this play out more, maybe a whole paid track or something like that? Or is this something that was sort of a COVID specialty that we may not see any longer?
Well, that was in the virtual space. And going forward, I think we're going to play with this hybrid model. And when we're looking at something like a local track, we're going to do it as a track instead of just a standalone conference. I think what we learned was there is value in the niche. We kept going after all these different little verticals, the e-commerce vertical, the local search vertical. I think there's growth there that nobody's addressing right now. 2009, 2010, there was a guy named Aaron Kalo who put out a series of conferences where he'd have a different conference almost every other week in a major city, and he'd attract 50 to 100 people. And then all of a sudden he had this massive conference in San Diego where all these people that had been to these local niche conferences suddenly showed up at his huge annual. Out of nowhere, he built this thing in less than a year's time. It really taught me that there's value in those verticals, so we're definitely going to feed and care for those verticals. I tried it like 10 years ago. We tried having each track. We treated it as a conference, so instead of the affiliate track, we had the affiliate conference at Pubcon. That didn't work so well, but I like this idea of doing a hybrid where we broadcast the conference as well, give the people at home an opportunity to, see people like Greg that they wouldn't normally get to see. So definitely going forward, we're going to talk to these niches a bit more. So.
All right. And Greg is going to be tickled that he's been mentioned this much in this discussion. Well, here's one thing I wanted to make sure I did. Congratulations to you. It's 20 years is no small feat. In my career, which is not even 20 years old now, I've seen conferences come and go. We used to have SES here in Chicago. That's no longer a thing. As you think about Pubcon, what do you think separated you? What do you think was the big differentiator between Pubcon and some of these conferences that have gone by the wayside?
Well, we grew out of Webmaster World, which was community, and it was networking, and people got to know one another. In fact, the original Pubcon was a group of Webmaster World moderators getting together in London at a pub, and that's where the name comes from, Pubcon. So that's the biggest thing, networking, and we've always focused on that. We've always had the bar event at the end, people get together and talk, and we've always emphasized that networking throughout the show. So now we've got people who've known each other for 20 years, deep friends, and that friendship, for better or for worse, grew out of Pubcon, and it was associated with Pubcon. And, well, I want to service that friendship, I go to Pubcon. I don't go to SES New York. I go to Pubcon. And so that networking and it goes back even farther than that, more like 35, 40 years when I was running bulletin board systems. And I started learning, go to one bulletin board system, there would be 100 new posts a day. You go to another one, and there would be one a week. And I couldn't figure out what the difference was. And the difference was the guy running the one bulletin board system would get everybody together and talk, and he would interact, and he would build this community. So when I started Webmaster World, I really wanted to grow the community from the get-go. I knew everybody had to be connected, and once we started on Pubcon, it was like, okay, we just keep everybody together, go forward. This is our niche. We're talking search. We're talking affiliate marketing. We're talking local search. Let's keep going together, and that's the biggest thing that differentiated us. Where other conferences, they were put together, well, let's make some money. Let's sell big tickets.
Yeah.
Let's get big. True. Let's get the corporates in here. Let's get Google, Yahoo, all of that in here, and let's make some money. And it just doesn't resonate with people long term. So.
I think that's accurate. I think that's the impression I have of Pubcon too. It's exactly how you described it. I love the pub story too. That's perfect for this show with the beer drinking. So one last thing. 20 years. As you reflect, do you have an all-time favorite Pubcon memory? Do you have a memory that just stands out as being an all-timer?
Probably Pubcon, Florida. It's just legendary. It was 2 months after the Florida update, which I named the Florida update, and I knew a guy in college whose name was Florida, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. That's how we came up with the Florida update name. And we went down to Florida, and I went down. This was our first major conference. Matt Cutts was coming down. Dan Boberg from Yahoo was coming down. And I didn't know that much about conferencing. I'd been involved a little bit in it, but being the guy that picks a venue, picks all this, the AV, all that wasn't me. This was the first time that I had an opportunity to do that. And so we went and looked at a hotel, and they took me into this hotel, and they put me up in these nice suites, brand new suites, multi-bedrooms, just super nice. And the rest of the hotel was shut off because it was being renovated. Well, we go back down 6 months later to see this hotel, and they had not renovated anything. The only thing they'd renovated were these 4 suites up front. They'd run out of money or something, and the rest of the hotel was still in its 1940s glory. So it was a dive from the get-go. But it turned out to be one of the best conferences and most memorable conferences for anybody who attended it. And in fact, the last day we were there, we were out, and the next people to come in were the Florida Swingers Association.
Oh my gosh!
True story. So here are all these webmasters sitting around.
This is not like the swing dance.
No.
Thing, right? This is swingers the way I think of it. Right? Okay.
So we're sitting around the lobby, a bunch of geeky webmasters, and here are all these 3/4 naked women walking through the lobby. And to this day, anybody who was at this conference still talks about it as legendary. And this was still back in the day before anybody knew that Matt Cutts was Google guy on Webmaster World. Right. So the Florida one will always stand out as the most memorable of them. That in New Orleans.
Oh my gosh!
So
I love it. Well, that's amazing. Hey, last question for you. Yeah, when we get back to conferences, this is probably one of the longest periods you've gone without. Like, being able to see live conferences and hear, what's new and going on in search. What topics are you jonesing to hear somebody present on? Is it Core Web Vitals? What are the topics that you just can't wait to hear?
Well,
one of these talented speakers.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk about everything that's topical, like Core Web Vitals, of course, and the changes in local Google My Business, the massive changes in Google My Business in the last year. You can't even hardly make a presentation on Google My Business because the week later it's something new. It's not even applicable what you just made up a deck for. So yeah, we'll talk topical, and then we're going to talk about all the changes we see due to COVID. The way people interact with the web, their expectations, the video. A year and a half ago, there was a guy on the BBC who was interviewed, a British ambassador, I believe, and he was being interviewed, and his toddler wanders in. If you remember seeing that video, a toddler wanders in behind him. He's at home doing a video recording. That got 300,000 shares on Facebook. Wow. Today, if my kid wandered in here, it'd be like, oh, hi, nice to meet you, going back over there. And nobody would say a thing about it. Our perceptions have changed dramatically about what is good quality, what quality is, authenticity. The political environment has changed in 90 degrees, and people want to talk about these topics. I know they do because I'm taking a few speaker pitches right now, and I'm getting all kinds of stuff like that. So we're going to talk about very much the changes that have gone on in search, and what do we think? Where do we think they're going? Google's up against it. They got their nose in multi-state antitrust investigation lawsuits. They got.
I've seen you tweeting about this.
Yeah. So there's going to be some changes coming. What does that mean for Google? Can they continue to drive the market with Core Web Vitals, which is, as far as I can tell, way out of their lane? They're definitely not staying in their lane by trying to dictate Core Web Vitals. What happened to the W3C? What happened to all of that cooperative we used to have? So I think there's some stuff people are just dying to talk about that have happened in the last year that you just won't find online. So.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, since you brought it up, I have a question that my staff would like to know. Tips for a good proposal. So if you want to speak at Pubcon, what are you guys looking for in these pitches for anybody who's watching?
I get that question almost every interview, and
I figured
and I always fumble it. I fumble it every time. I fumble it. Speak from your experience. Number one, what have you learned? How did you learn it? Share as much information as you can. Now, there's the flip side of that. I mentioned New Orleans a bit ago. That was truly an education for me. We had a speaker get up and give a great case study on a client and talk kind of disparagingly about the client, the mistakes the client had made and problems. They wouldn't listen to him, Well, it turned out the client was in the audience. Literally, I get a phone call an hour later from a lawyer saying, how come you're letting this guy on stage and he's speaking for you? So you got to be careful when you do case studies. So case studies are great, but make sure you have approval from all sides and it's non-promotional. So that's number one. Number two, authenticity. People can tell if you went out and read a story on the web and are trying to regurgitate that into a PowerPoint. We all know there's a few people in our space here in search that basically do that. They go read a blog post and they put together a PowerPoint and, hey, this is all my stuff. Well, no, it wasn't. You read it on Jim's blog. So authenticity, number two. And, number three, the big one that we're really kind of bumping into the last 3-4 years is put a presentation online, throw it on YouTube, let us see it on there. It used to be we wanted to see the deck up, up on SlideShare. That's not so important anymore. We'd just soon see some video live that you've put out there at another conference. So authenticity is the biggest bottom line, I think.
All right. Well, Brett, you're one of the really good guys in search. I appreciate you coming on. How do people reach it? How do people reach you if they'd like to do so?
Pubcon.com, all kinds of contact info on there. So.
Do you have a favorite social media? Are you LinkedIn, Twitter, or anything?
I think our Facebook group is where we hang out the best. I'm a reluctant Twitter user again, after a 5-year break, I think. So, but.
All right. Well, awesome. Well, Brett, I'm going to sign off with a virtual cheers. Thank you again for coming on.
Thank you, Brett.
I've really enjoyed the conversation. Hope to see you in Florida here coming up soon.
And hopefully Vegas this fall. So we're working on that as well. So. All right. Thank you, guys.
All right. Sign off. Till next week, we'll be back with Suds Search.